All right, y'all, welcome back to Keepin It Comics. So we're diving into a new West Coast Avengers series here. Now, it is hard for me to say whether or not yet this series is actually good, but I will say this. It is funny as heck. Also, Ultron has this new arc right now that's going to be called the Gospel of Ultron. And when you see what it's all about, let me just tell you, it is wild. So we're starting out here in Los Angeles, California, right? Where Tony Stark and Rhodey have put together a somewhat unconventional West Coast Avengers team. Now, one of the members here is Ultron, of all people. Supposedly, this dude is reformed, but you'll see some funky stuff going on a little bit later on here. Now, Ultron, he makes his flashy hero entrance here by saving a mom and her child. And it's actually pretty funny because the mom says, "I thought you were Iron Man, but you're that robot that the Avengers fight all the time." So then Ultron responds, he's like, "Listen, I've recently changed my ways." Now, meanwhile, Iron Man is cruising down the freeway. And when I say cruising down the freeway, this dude is driving like an absolute maniac right now because he's supposed to be meeting up with the rest of the West Coast Avengers here. But if you've been following the current Iron Man series here, you know that Tony has been having some issues with his suit, tied up in the big drama with like Roxxon and AIM and a few others here. So he has to go old school with his equipment. So he's stopping by right now an old storage unit to grab a very vintage suit, giving us some of that nostalgia. Like this, listen, I like it. Now, just as he suits up here, a group called the Sovereign Sons, they show up ready to open fire. Now, one of them declares this. He's like, "Tonight will be long remembered. The Sovereign Sons will remove the metal boots of Iron Man from the necks of freedom-loving Americans." So poetic. But of course, guys, listen, when you have to deal with Iron Man here, you always have to expect some sort of political stuff going on, right? Now, Iron Man, he steps out, like I said, in this throwback suit here. And if you look at this thing, because the suit is so old and it's been here for so long, this dude has jumper cables attached to it to keep it going. Oh my gosh. So they start firing at him, right? And then he starts fighting back. But in the middle of the scuffle, his suit runs out of power. Now, one of the guys taunts him. He's like, "Oh, you're out of juice, huh?" So then Tony is like, "Yeah, but I never run out of fists." Which I'm like, dude, this is the corniest line I have ever heard. Now, after dealing here with the Sovereign Sons, Rhodey reaches out to Tony to let him know that, like, hey, there's another group here of the Sovereign Sons that are rallying at this old railway with hostages. So Tony's like, "Listen, I am inbound right now." But then he mentions, he's like, "I'm also experiencing some technical difficulties." And then we see this dude riding on a scooter with the same jumper cable still attached to him. Like, I'm telling you, this thing is hilarious, man. So at the old railway, right, we get to see the other members of the West Coast Avengers team. Now, we already know about Ultron, right? And then, of course, we also know about War Machine since we were talking about Rhodey. We got Spider-Woman with her fine ass. And then we got this dude named Blue Bolt, who is an old villain. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I did not choose to look up anything about Blue Bolt here. So for all you extreme comic enthusiasts, if you have something on it, you can drop it in the comments. So the Sovereign Sons, they're making their demands right now because they're like, they want the US government to recognize their independent nation, among other things. And Blue Bolt is all impatient as heck. He's like, "Listen, why are we even listening to these dudes in the first place?" So War Machine reminds him, like, "Bro, because there are hostages here and we're trying to de-escalate the situation." So Ultron, he steps in, he tries to negotiate. He's like, "If you surrender, no harm will come to you and you will receive a fair trial." Now, one of the sons snaps back. He's like, "You expect us to trust a genocidal robot? Last I saw, you were wearing Hank Pym's face." And then Ultron admits, he's like, he does have a point. Now, for those of you who don't know here, Hank Pym had died in the series or the arc here, Rage of Ultron. And this is ultimately where Hank pays like the ultimate sacrifice to stop Ultron from infecting all life on Earth. But we also recently just found out, because of the Moon Knight series here, which we did cover on this channel, that Hank Pym is very much alive. But I don't believe that they know this yet, based on how they're acting. So War Machine steps in, right? He's like, let me take a crack at the negotiations. So just then, Iron Man shows up and everybody's looking at this dude like, bro, like, why are you on the scooter right now? So he's like, listen, it's a long story, but then he asked Blue Bolt, he's like, yo, I need to jump. And Blue Bolt's like, bro, this is embarrassing, man. So then Tony retorts, he's like, listen, I'll pay you. And my payment is not to kick your ass off of the Avengers, after, of course, having them join from this new prison work release program, which apparently is how they're recruiting members now to this West Coast Avengers team. Like, what is going on here, guys? So after Iron Man gets juiced up, he's like, okay, well, what's the plan here? So then Ultron suggests, he's like, well, coercion seems unlikely. I suggest a coordinated, non-lethal attack. And then Blue Bolt sits this one out. And if anyone has realized anything by now, Blue Bolt is a massive hothead. So true to form, he takes matters into his own hands and starts blasting. But then Ultron's like, my guy, there are underground gas lines here. And just as you would expect, a massive fire breaks out, which then leads to a massive explosion, which I'm just sitting here like, bro, this is a beautiful debut here for the West Coast Avengers. But what else could we have expected? So later on, right, most of them are at the hospital. And Blue Bolt, he's like casted up, right? He's laid up in this bed, right? And he's like full cast, and he's doing an interview right now with the reporter. And of course, this dude is embellishing what actually happened, when in reality, this is 100% his fault. In the meantime, Spider-Woman, she also has some injuries as well. And she visits a patient named Meredith Love in her hospital room. So Meredith, she's a cancer patient, or she has cancer. Same thing. I know, same thing. I don't know why I repeated it. So then Tony Stark, he joins them greeting Meredith, and she mentions how she's leaving, unless, of course, Tony Stark cures cancer. And given Tony Stark's connections with, certain mutants, I'm pretty sure that he probably could help to heal her, but I mean, that's just semantics. Let's move on. But before she goes, right, Tony offers to fly her around, but then she declines. She's like, I'm not really much for flying, but I am going to church. And I'm telling you, when you see which church she's going to later, this is going to be hilarious to do. But then she says a couple interesting things here. She says, the energy is moving on. And then she says, we're all just electricity, right? So then Tony looks at her and he's like, what? Like, WTF was that? So then she leaves, and then Spider-Woman is like, listen, Tony, I'll take you up on that offer for a flight. Now, while they're airborne, she starts talking to Tony about this whole West Coast Avengers situation. She's like, oh, listen, this team is an absolute disaster. Ultron's too timid most of the time. And honestly, I think the world's going to freak out if they find out why you trust him. So listen, now I'm intrigued. I'm like, why does he trust him? So then she continues, she's like, plus Blue Bolt is legitimately going to get somebody killed, or a lot of somebody's. And reading the room, she asks a question. She's like, did you ask me to join because I have a rap sheet? And what happens if your trust in Ultron is misplaced? So then Tony replies, he's like, listen, we're taking a total leap of faith here, and I have to believe in redemption. And then Spider-Woman kind of presses him. She's like, but you have a plan, right? Like, if it goes bad with him, like, this is freaking Ultron we're talking about, right, guys? And then he assures her, he's like, yes, I have a plan if the Ultron experiment goes bad. So she says, good, because I owe it to you to be honest. There's a story floating around that your marriage to Emma Frost, real, fake, or whatever, changed you. And she implies that maybe Emma flipped some switches in his brain. So Tony admits, like, listen, if she changed anything, she did it the old-fashioned way, because he let himself think that it might actually be real. So man, listen, Tony has some feelings for her, right? And then he says, you can tell our friends I'm the same neurotic, paranoid, brilliant, obsessive addict that I've always been. So here they arrive at this airport here that Tony recently acquired, and he mentions that he won it in a bidding war and also won some hearts and minds by promising part of the property that it will become a low-income housing, and how the majority of it, though, will become a permanent Avengers stronghold for the next century. And they'll be able to avenge anywhere on the West Coast in a matter of minutes from there. And they have a nice little taco truck he mentions as well, which is where we see Rhodey and Ultron. They're enjoying tacos. Well, not Ultron as much here. He's doing something completely different. Rhodey's actually eating the tacos. So then Rhodey checks in with Tony. He's like, listen, Jessica isn't quitting, right? So then Tony's like, nah, but we do need to balance the team a bit here, and mentions how he has some cards to play. So then later on, Tony makes a call here to Firestar, and it's just good to see Firestar. He tells her about the current situation with the West Coast Avengers and how he could use someone who's a real straight arrow, as he puts it. Ironically though, Firestar is literally sitting in a bar, or sitting at the bar with no name, where villains go to drink. So there's like villains literally right behind her. And she's like, okay, fine, I'll bite, I'll fly out tomorrow. And then finally, guys, we get to the moment that we've all been waiting for. I told you that there was gonna be something kind of weird here happening. This is where things get really interesting, right? So at an abandoned power station near downtown LA, we see Meredith Love getting out of a taxi. Now, a man walks her down an aisle with, I guess if you can call this an aisle here, that's flanked by people. And he asks, he's like, are you here because you've heard his voice? And then she replies, I have, and it has given me hope. I don't think I have very long though. Then a familiar voice says, then we should commence with your metamorphosis at once. And I'm like, hold on. We finally see this dude's face, and it's Ultron. But I was being a little bit facetious here, because it's not the same Ultron that's currently with the West Coast Avengers. And you can see here, because dude has like this little sachet, this little veil that's on him, looking like this dude's a part of the mass choir. And then he says, welcome, Meredith. I'm glad you found me before it was too late. Do you give yourself to me freely? And I'm like, what in the cult? And she says, I do. You mentioned this will be painful. And he responds, regrettably, for a moment. Then it will be the last of physical pain that you will feel. Salvation shall be yours. All you need to do is say the words. So then she says, you will save me. And he confirms, yes. And then we see the transformation start to happen here. Then he lays her body down with like the head on top of the android too. And then he says to her, he's like, Meredith, can you hear me? And then she gasps. She's like, yes. And he says, good, sleep, heal. And then we see like a chamber that are filled with like pods of what I can only assume are a bunch of different Merediths. And then he concludes, he's like, welcome to the family. Soon the entire world will hear the gospel of Ultron. And that's it, folks. Listen, the gospel of Ultron saga has commenced. Now, I'll be honest with you, this is kind of an overused trope here with Ultron. Oh, we thought it was good. Ah, then he's bad. Well, I guess now he's usually always bad, but you get my point here. But something about this kind of excites me. Number one, it's good to see Ultron back, but also knowing that there is like a Moon Knight series right now where Hank Pym is alive. That intrigues me, because I'm like, is there gonna be a place where the worlds collide? There has to be some way, right, where Hank Pym shows up, especially considering the ties between the West Coast Avengers, Moon Knight, Tigra, all these. It has to be. Maybe it's just wishful thinking, but listen, let me know what you think down below here in the comments. Like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Hit the notification bell so that you know when the videos do go live. Follow us on social media here. All the links are going to be down in the description. And as always, thank you so much for kicking it with Keepin' the Comic. Bye.